Good afternoon, Frank.
Hello, Professor.
I should congratulate you on the New Year's Day. Because today is New Year's Day in the Persian. It's the Persian New Year,
Oh, is that
and it's
concomitant with spring, or is that just?
the spring equinox, which I think was around noon today.
Yeah,
And it's appropriate that we should start with this since President Putin has said that he's going to rethink his whole attitude towards Iran,
yes.
result of what the um, Europeans and Americans are doing to him.
He's a real
So
home wrecker.
all sorts of things may be changing for the new year.
Hmm.
And it's really quite amazing how many things have been changing since we talked last. That an airplane can get lost
Hmm. Hmm.
and nobody can find anything
Hmm.
is difficult to believe in the
Hmm.
21st century. Um, I wonder whether we're ever going to find out what happened to that airplane.
We may not.
But one would like to think that sooner or later they will find a technology that will trace it in some way.
Hmm.
Um,
Well,
but
if it's underneath 5 or 6 miles of water in the Indian Ocean, good luck.
is it as deep as that? I know it's
Yeah,
deep water, but I didn't know it was 5 or 6
yeah.
miles.
They're well, maybe I'm exaggerating, but I think it's like 19,000 feet. Some of the trenches are that deep there. Yeah. But
Huh.
as I'm sure you know, the Australian satellite spotted some debris, which
Yeah,
but it's
which they can't find on the sea at yet
yeah,
so
there.
far.
It's going to take two
Uh,
days for ships to get to that area, supposedly.
but it's amazing that they should be expecting to find it 2,000 kilometers southwest of Perth,
Hmm. Yes,
uh, because that must be absolutely as far as it could possibly have gone with the amount of fuel it had.
it's a very interesting dilemma for the reinsurance world because the lead insurer on the plane on the hull risk just approximately like $100 million for the replacement of the plane was the big German insurer Allianz. And Allianz was obligated to pay in case of a malfunction, a crew error, um, some act of God, something like that. So Allianz already paid Malaysian Airlines. They traditionally act very quickly in the event of an aircraft loss. However, last week when it became, I wouldn't say apparent, but quite possible that there might be a deliberateness to this and there was human intervention or terrorism involved, then another set of insurers would come into line to pay on that risk. And that was led by the London syndicate Atrium. So if they do determine that it was terrorism related or something in that direction and it was not malfunction, then that means that Allianz will get their money back and that Atrium syndicate will have to pay up. So the reinsurance world is watching this pretty closely. I mean, it's not a great deal of money, but it's still going to cause some changes.
But that means that there will be a lot of financial interest in finding out what happened.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yes, Allianz is sure going to. They're going to put their hands up and say, "Well, wait a minute. I mean, it's pretty clear now that the plane didn't crash because of the plane's problems." So,
So
so what?
that in itself, I think, is very interesting.
Mhm.
That nothing happens, any war in the world that isn't finance related.
I would say
Fin-
so.
Finance is the paradigm that measures everything,
Hmm.
and even something like this, which is completely unexpected, unprecedented, unimaginable
Hmm.
almost, and can't be solved. Nevertheless, there's a strong financial interest in finding out the answer, which means that presumably if they don't find the wreckage in the next few days, there'll be uh, for another year or
Oh
more.
yeah, they'll keep looking for years and years and
Yeah,
years because
yeah.
if this pops up, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, they can find the wreckage and they find the data recorders and it's proven that it was because of the crew's intervention, then Allianz is going to want their money back and they'll get it back.
And presumably, if it's unsolved, then there's no way to resolve whose responsibility it is.
No, but strictly speaking from the reinsurance world, perhaps enough has already emerged that
Uh,
some sort of settlement between the two squadrons of reinsurers on each side of that ticket is going to be negotiated out. So, because you can be sure that there's a lot of collective breath holding going on now at
yeah,
Atrium. They're wondering, oh man, are we going to be on this risk after all? But
yeah,
it's funny, you mentioned the financial aspect, and I'm thinking of the economic sanctions that the Americans have taken against the Russians. And I don't know, I'm sure you do know, but the economic sanctions are very limited. They're limited to approximately 13 or 14 people, humans. I mean, the oligarchical coterie around Putin. And
it's very strange,
and
very
I
strange.
heard on Bloomberg News driving in yesterday that the United States didn't want to take stronger steps in the sanctions for fear of alienating U.S. business. And I
Yeah,
was like, what's
yeah.
the point of doing sanctions? I mean,
And the Economist is getting angry with the Americans
I don't
for not
blame them.
being serious enough.
I mean, it's a little strange.
But the whole situation, I think, is extremely interesting because this is happening at a time when nation states are ceasing to be the authorities that they have been for the last 200 years,
Mm,
or
mm,
100 years maybe. Certainly, the nation state has been the ultimate, um, well, I'm not really sure what to call it, but
authority.
because it's never worked as well as people pretended it did.
Mm,
But it's been pretended, certainly since the Second World War, that if you're a nation state, then you have sovereignty and nobody can interfere with you, even
mm,
though still did interfere with you.
mm,
And it's been becoming more and more obvious, and we've mentioned this before in our weekly discussions, that nation states are losing control. And now the Americans and the Europeans, and especially Angela Merkel, is insisting that the Ukraine is a nation state and has sovereignty and nobody must touch it.
right.
But she's out of date.
Yes. Yeah. It was funny. I was editing the last week's discussion earlier today, and you made that point repeatedly, and you're of course correct that
And
the
it's becoming more obvious now because apart from the fact that if you measure the nation statehood of Ukraine against other nation states, even in the area,
mhm.
there is a significant difference. And the um, uh, the Americans and the Europeans really can't do anything about what's happening, and they're endangering their own interests by taking this position.
Well, I don't know what the resolution is going to be, but I agree with you. There's not much the West can do, and certainly there's nothing they're going to be able to offer to Putin to get him to withdraw or to reverse anything. So it's one of these I think situations where we've been presented with this, and we're going to have to live with it. And I think the West might be trying to back down from the ledge.
I think if we had people in authority in Europe and America who understood that the world is changing and they need to keep abreast of the change,
Mm,
if not ahead of it,
mm,
they would be handling this in a very different way. And the way to handle it is to talk,
mm,
not
mm,
just to take a position against the other side. You've got to negotiate and offer one thing in response to another all the time. And that's the way everything is beginning to work in the world now, I think, that force is becoming less useful than it ever
mm,
was in the past, simply because you can't rely on people maintaining the same loyalties
mm.
or institutions working the way they did before. Everything is changing.
Well, let's talk about some people who have a particular awareness that things don't work the way they used to work any longer. The regime in Kuala Lumpur, all right? Now with the presence of several hundred foreign journalists there exposing the entire society and government to sunlight. I mean, there's not much to report on with this crazy plane. And these people are all there and they're all waiting, and that's what reporters do. They begin to write things. And I sent you that article from the New York Times, I think, about this unusual interfaith kind of service that just popped up haphazardly on the street, including Taoists, Buddhists, Christians, and Muslims, all praying for.
Amazing,
I was
uh,
very surprised.
amazing collaboration between people from different faiths that normally wouldn't be seen
No, yeah,
doing things together.
yeah,
Uh, no, especially in Malaysia, where you can't even use the same word for God
yes, yeah.
as people in another religion.
And I mean,
No, I think that well, this is what it it always has this effect when something new and startling happens. It changes things, it disrupts things, it
mm.
makes people, forces people to work out new ways of thinking about things.
So in this sense, if we use the example of Malaysia, I mean, the something that happened was the loss of the airplane, which then had a cascading effect that led to the arrival of the hundreds of foreign journalists and people beginning to, I mean, I'll be the first one to admit this. I apparently reached the age of 58 years old or 59 years old without knowing how to properly spell Malaysia. I would always spell it Mayla, but
Oh, really?
I've been corrected now because of auto spelling. I now know it's Malay, Malay. I should have realized that. So, but a lot of people now know a lot more about Malaysia than they did 2 weeks ago. Let's put it like that.
Yes, and a lot more about the Indian Ocean as well.
Yes, yes, and I mean it's funny, but I mean in some ways this is sort of like a very narrowly focused beam of the power of globalization. I mean it's like a
Well, that there is a Norwegian ship in that part of the Indian Ocean on its way from South Africa to South America. I think that was the route it was taking,
mhm.
or maybe to Australia, and from South Africa to Australia, and that the Norwegians have a tradition of always making themselves available for searches like this.
Okay.
And so the Norwegian public is very engaged in this search.
Oh, I didn't know that. All
Yeah,
right.
that
Okay.
was on the BBC as I came in here this
Okay.
afternoon.
Well, I mean, and then President Obama made an announcement yesterday that the United States remains very, very concerned about the fate of Flight 370 and is going to do anything it can do in order to make sure that the fate is ultimately known. I mean, it's a big thing, and
Because if it can happen to one plane, it can happen to another.
presumably that's the idea behind it. Yeah, yeah. And then meanwhile, another little thought. Did you know that Al Qaeda had a quarterly magazine called Inspire?
Inspire? No.
Yes. Well, they came out with their spring issue this week, and they once again urged jihadists to giving very specific instructions as to how to build bombs, mentioning targets in the United States, referring to that tall building in Chicago, the Sears Tower, they called it, although
Yeah, yeah,
they're not
yeah.
correct. It's now the Willis Tower. Talking about attacking English Premier Football club matches, especially during the playoff season, talking about attacking in the West during the holiday season in December, and be sure to utilize disguises, including that of a big white beard. I mean, it was a very unusual article. First of all,
Was this on Google
uh,
News?
I saw it on the news. We ran it on our television, so I was first of all surprised to know that Al Qaeda had a magazine. But I guess anything's possible.
Yeah.
And then this magazine apparently, in the spring issue last year, gave specific instructions as to how to build bombs based on pressure cookers, which of course were used in the Boston Marathon just a few weeks later.
Hmm.
So apparently it's widely read by jihadists.
And it's English language.
Yes, I'll send you the article. They had a facsimile of one of the pages giving the instructions about the Sears Tower and the Premier League.
Hmm. Well, we'll have plenty to think about in the coming week.
Well, fortunately, nothing was mentioned about Philadelphia or New Jersey,
Good.
so we're relatively safe.
Okay.
All right,
So
Professor. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you next week.
yeah.
Bye. Bye.